right. That's right. I own an import-export business,
Yeah,
know?
I'm big in
Um,
import exports.
yeah. Good morning, guys. How you guys doing this morning?
Good,
Doing
man.
well.
Yeah, I just got my coffee.
Same, same.
Got a coffee too. Woo. Well, you can't see mine, I guess.
It's the best part of waking up.
Danny's
Yeah,
Coffee
Folgers
in your
in
cup.
your cup.
Bingo. Good to the
Nice.
last drop.
with his trusty donkey.
Yeah. How's your week been, you guys? Like, what have you guys been up to? Coding,
Coding.
cybersecuritying,
Yeah, a lot
pen
of coding.
testing.
Yeah, it's been eventful. I've been trying to knock out all these prereq. So like studying for the OSCP, if you complete about 80% of the coursework and 80% of the practice exams, then
Yeah,
they'll give you a bonus 10 points, which can be critical to passing the exam.
Yeah, it's
So I'm
huge.
trying to complete all that stuff. It's challenging, but hopefully I'll get there in time.
nice.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Very cool. Well, if anybody's on here listening, let us know in the comments what you guys have been up to this week. I've been working on an app that I've been building for myself to track development hours for like freelance coding. Did some of that on the airplane ride down here, which was kind of cool. Good morning, Bryce.
Morning, Bryce.
Um, it was interesting because I had to nap for a little bit on the plane, so I was like, I'm not gonna buy the Wi-Fi thing, and then so then I woke up and I was like, all right, now I'm gonna code, but then I didn't have Wi-Fi, so I was like
Oh, you can't look. You
coding
have any
without
documentation or anything?
no documentation. I was like, somehow the app was like pulling a user too, which worked out because if it like didn't pull the user, it just wouldn't log in, but it was, so I could see some of it. But yeah, it was like very interesting, like no documentation, just sort of like guessing at certain things, and then like, okay, that didn't work, how am I gonna fix it, but
That's cool.
but yeah, it worked out. So got some
Hey,
coding done on the
you can
airplane.
actually do work on the plane too. That's like,
Yeah,
huge because in most things you cannot do that.
yeah, totally. And I think that it's a pretty good segue into our topic today. Do you guys remember what the topic is?
Get in the habit of coding.
Hmm.
Yeah. So how
You
do you
know,
get
before we get into that,
oh, all right.
I just wanted to share a story because there's
Okay.
rumors going
Hmm.
around that there's no jobs in coding. There's all these layoffs and
Mm.
all these different companies. It's impossible to get a job as a coder. Like there's just no work, period. And
It's like
you know,
nobody's building websites or anything anymore.
just this
Stop.
week, I know, just this week happened once again. Like work, when you're a developer and you're good at what you do, work comes just from people that you know. Like somebody I've
Yeah.
known for a few years is now looking for someone to build a website and apps, and he knows that that's what we do. And so he just reached out to me and he said, "Hey, can you guys build this for us?" And that's something where when you become a skilled developer, and that's something we work at profusely with everybody in our mentoring slash coding program, definitely not a boot camp called Web Dev Incubator. And but that's something we work with people and in becoming skilled, proficient coders so that you can have really good looking projects. So then people know you're a developer and you can get work just from word of mouth. But
Yeah.
anyways, that was story time. Back to you, Russ.
Yeah. So I think that's like a good segue into our topic today, which is how to, build habits around coding, right? Because that's one of the hardest things is like life happens, right? There's so many things that happen in life that make it easy to get distracted from coding. And so I think that's something that we've all faced in our journeys so far. And I know a lot of people inside the incubator have faced that too. Like one of the guys in here just had a baby, right? And so how do you go from having a newborn child to like staying on track with learning development? It's actually quite difficult, right?
Well, I think this is one of the things too, when you're learning by yourself, this is one of the biggest hurdles too, because like most people learning on their own, you look for excuses to stop, to take the
Hmm.
pressure off because you know it's hard, you know it's going to take a long time. And so as soon as you find an excuse, it's like, okay, that's an excuse. I can now blame something else. I don't feel responsible. And it's easy to lose motivation. So I think it's like, yeah, I mean, he's lucky because he has a team too. He has a community to rely on that helps a lot keeping you going, I think. I think that's a big part of it too,
Yeah.
is just having people that you work with can be a huge part of keeping you motivated.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that's a great sort of first point is that if you want to get in the habit of coding and stay in the habit of coding, you need people to keep you accountable and keep you on track and give you sort of that next step. Because I know that's something that I've seen a lot of our students before they joined the web dev incubator was they sort of were just like drifting in this, sea of coding things and trying different things, like trying this little thing, trying Python, trying HTML, trying SQL, trying databases, trying APIs, but then like they never really do any like make any big steps forward and make any progress. So having somebody who can show you like the progression through learning a particular skill set like web development or cybersecurity or anything like that and give you like the next steps, right? Because if I were to go and try to learn cybersecurity right now, probably wouldn't know the first thing um, to learn. But if I asked Randall, he could give me the entire track of like, this is what you should learn first, then you should learn this, then you should learn this.
Yeah.
Talking about coding, I did learn some new coding this week. I learned Visual Basic, and I programmed
Whoa.
Nice.
my first word macro that got a reverse shell on a Windows computer. So that was
Nice.
pretty cool.
That's
Yeah.
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Good
is
morning,
awesome.
everybody. I see some other comments in here. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Randall. Good morning, Christopher Mitchko.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
Oh,
see
and thanks,
Christopher
Bryce.
Mitchko
Bryce.
has been very active, and actually, he shared a lot of interesting stuff for how to actually code on your phone.
Yeah.
Very cool, because
Mm,
I heard that was possible, but I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. But he kind of solved the riddle, and he does it
ah,
regularly, which is cool.
right on. Good job, Christopher. Finding solutions. So, yeah, so what else do you guys do that help you get in the habit of coding?
I was gonna say one thing I think that's helpful too is just any habit is reminding yourself too that habits don't just form instantly. Like I think one of the
Yeah,
biggest mistakes like we've made is like all this self-help crap that's like do this in 7 days or 24 hours and it's like that's not a habit. That's a thing you did
yeah,
once. Like a
yeah,
habit takes time. So like you have to also expect that like at the beginning there's gonna be bumps. It's gonna take you time to get in that regular progression of doing it all the time. And I think that's okay. Like remind yourself that's all right. And don't forget that
Yeah.
because otherwise you'll be hard on yourself and you'll quit.
One
yeah,
thing,
totally.
one thing that really grinds my gears that I've been seeing recently is like these videos on social media, YouTube, wherever, where they're like, I did this for 30 days. I did that for
Yeah.
30 days.
Yeah,
I did this. And it's like, you can't see any appreciable benefit in anything doing it for 30 days. Like, you need to think about like 30 months, 30 years. Then you start to see a difference. So 30 days is ridiculous. But anyways, I just need to vent a little bit because he brought
Yeah.
that up. But I had one recommendation for habits. Anyways, probably the most helpful thing for me with developing habits is something called habit stacking. And
Oh, that's a good
this
one. Yeah.
is so look in your life at things that you do on a regular basis. So maybe it's brushing your teeth, maybe it's having a coffee, maybe it's walking your dog, whatever it may be, but things that you do on a regular basis. Well, you're going to do those pretty much every day around the same time. So if you want to incorporate a new behavior, a new habit, just stack your new habit on top of that one. And that'll actually be a trigger to start you doing your new habit. So if coding is something that you want to do and you're not yet coding consistently, well, you go walk your dog every morning. When you get back from that, just code for 5 minutes. And you just start doing that time and time again. Eventually it becomes a habit.
I heard some, it's like they also talk about like it's like sort of like stacking, it's like combining, but like it's also like taking something fun like that like if there's a show you love to watch, like code while you're watching the show. They say that like
mm,
exercise, like always do your like, do the elliptical when that show's on. So it's like motivates you to do it, at least at
yeah,
first. And it sets a nice time for you too. I think that's the important thing is like most people try to get into stuff and learn on their own, but they have no schedule. And it's like so like
yeah.
finding that time, we all have time in our day. It's easy to find, but figure out what time works best for you and commit to being like, I'm going to sit down my computer and code for at least 30 minutes of a day that time. And that gets you on that road started to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a big one that you mentioned before, Danny, which that was something that I want to implement when I'm not traveling, but which is just like having a set time in the day to do development work, right? Because for me, that's a big struggle is that there's so many things that are happening in my life where there's like kids and like life things that just go on. And so it can be difficult to actually find like a time to do something, but scheduling a time in your day actually makes it way easier because you're like, cool, everything else gets put to the side now. Like alarm just went off. Now it's time to code for an hour or whatever it is, you know?
Well, it's crazy. I started this a while ago actually, because like I every morning like, I get up, walk my, I have coffee, I walk my dog, take care of my, feed him and stuff. And then usually like it's around 8:15 when that's done. And then about 8:30 I'll start working. And I usually work till about 11. Then I take a break, take the dogs out. And it's like I basically use the dogs as like a marker but it really worked out well
Yeah,
because then after that, then I work till about 4, then he eats dinner, so then I give him dinner and then we go out, take a walk. And then like, but it really helped
yeah.
build that schedule, like having actually the dog, which is funny.
So if you want
No,
to
it
be a
makes a
coder,
lot of
just get a
sense.
dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes sense too because you're also by taking a dog out, you're like getting some like relaxation and like, getting a break from coding too, which is super helpful as well.
Yeah, that's just it too, I think is like, and scheduling time too to do other things like that, like taking walks or doing a hobby that you enjoy. Just because like I know like we've talked about it so many times, but like how many problems do you solve when you're not sitting at your computer? For me, it's like all of them.
Most of them. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Like
Yeah.
I was just thinking about this the other day because like I was struggling with something and then I put it down and then I woke up in the morning and at like 7 o'clock I was brushing my teeth and I was like, oh, that's how I'll solve it. And it's like
Yeah.
just comes to you. It's so funny, but your brain's so good at processing things if you let it. You just need the problem to be presented, and then you just gotta let it work out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's funny, like we're obviously traveling here to Colombia, and my girlfriend was like, the night before we left, she had a dream that she forgot her passport, and she did because she has two. And she was like, "Oh my God, like my mind literally reminded me that I need to get my other passport." And that's like the crazy part about your subconscious mind is it's like it's always working in the background. And so when you let it do the work, it actually works even better. So I totally agree. I mean, having that time to like to code, but also having break times in there is super important as well. I want to mention another thing about like a habit of coding, and I think you sort of touched upon this, Randall, but I wanted to sort of emphasize it. So when I've heard this from a lot of our students and from a lot of people inside the group, I think even in a previous live stream, somebody had asked this during the live stream. They're like, how much time is the appropriate amount of time to code, right?
Oh
And I think
yeah,
that's like a struggle for a lot of people when they first get into coding because you see, developers who are further along than you who can put in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12. I mean, I put in hours of like 12-hour days of coding
yeah.
before, like many times. And that's super intimidating to somebody who's just getting into coding, right? So I want to address that because I think that's something that actually holds people back, which is they just have this expectation like, if I'm going to have the habit of coding, I have to put in 4, 5, 6 hours of coding. And that's not the truth. I think when you're starting, it's totally appropriate to do a half hour of coding, right? Or whatever, like a line of code, right? Just so that you're doing it every single day. Because building that habit is all about just opening up your computer, opening up VS Code, and like putting something out there. And so I think if you're brand new or you're just starting out, like don't set that bar so high because you're just telling your brain that you're failing every time that you're not doing that,
Yeah.
and you want to set yourself up for success. So set the bar super, super, super low so that you can give yourself that dopamine hit of like, hey, I did it today. I wrote one line of code. That's all I wanted to do today. Cool. Like, and then you can progress because it does take time to be able to like sit and code for that many hours at a time.
But it comes too, and I think that's the thing. Like it comes as you
Yeah.
get better at it, you'll find it more and more enjoyable, and you won't want to stop. But I think too, like I
Yeah.
remember, I think Randy was was the first person to tell me this, but like there was this idea too about like building habits where like I think the person said something like, if you want to exercise, like don't make your goal like an hour exercise, make it like get your yoga mat out.
Yeah.
And that's it. Because then
Yep.
you already succeeded, right? And the whole point is just to do something every day. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a ton at first because that'll build up as you get better at it. And as you like, and once you start, I think that's the other thing people forget is like once you schedule a half hour in a day to do this, that can easily become an hour or two later as you start to get
Yeah.
into it and get better at it and find it enjoyable and find new problems. Like it'll come with
Yeah.
time, but we push ourselves so hard in the beginning to be experts immediately because that's what everything tells us is these overnight, breakouts and whatever. It's like, and it's just discouraging. It just makes it impossible to feel like you're not a failure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
totally. And go ahead.
I really like this topic because this was actually one thing that I was going to say next is that so like a lot of people go with the mindset of how can I learn this as quickly as possible? And
Mm,
that's the recipe for burnout. Because what you do
yeah.
is you start putting in way too much up front, it's unsustainable, and then when life catches up with you, all of a sudden you quit. And it was painful for the whole time before, so you're like, forget it, I'm not going back. A better mindset that I've found that's helpful is what's the minimum that I can do every day for the rest of my life?
Mm,
And then find that and just do that. And and
yeah.
honestly, in the beginning, I found for myself that when I start a new habit, if I throttle myself intentionally in the beginning, so like I have a whole bunch of passion and drive in the beginning. I want to go for 2 hours or 3 hours when I'm starting something new. But if I say, hey, you know what, a half an hour a day is all that I can sustainably do for the rest of my life, I'm going to stop at a half an hour because then the drive is still in you as you're going and going and going. And then you build up that half an hour every day for a month, for 2 months, whatever it is, and you start increasing it and you completely eliminate the possibility of burnout because it's still fun. You're still
Yeah.
passionate
Yeah,
about it and you're still doing it every day. And by this point, a couple months in, now you actually have developed a habit.
And by doing it
totally.
every day too, your subconscious brain still thinking about these things. You're getting that benefit every day of sort of
Yeah.
exposure and all, which makes it way easier to build. I
That's a
think, and
great
you,
point, Danny.
yeah,
You remember that? You remember that thing where they did a study where
yeah,
if you do something for 5 minutes every day, it's better than doing it 3 hours one time a week. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not sure how good your math is, but 5 minutes, seven
Horrible.
days is 35 minutes. So if you do 35 minutes, but you spread it out 5 minutes per day, one each day, that's better than putting 3 hours, which is like 6 times the amount of time just on one day and then having 7 days
it
between it.
makes sense though. Our brains need time to process things to like, for it to sink in and be part of it.
Yeah.
And
It's
I want,
also like sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you go
I
ahead.
was gonna say it's also the idea of like cramming for an exam. Like if
Yeah.
anybody here went to college or had, any sort of education and you've tried to cram for an exam, you understand that it doesn't work. Like you can't cram for an exam because your brain can only process a certain amount of information at a time before it burns out and it's just not able to like comprehend anything. So you have to spread it out.
That's a good example too, because like, I don't know about you, but like I can remember so many exams, like cramming for you do fine on the exam, but you don't remember anything about the information
Right.
afterwards because basically it's like a
Oh,
dump.
totally.
You dump like
Yeah.
you store it for a minute, dump it, and then it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're just telling your brain like this information is not, it's being stored in short-term memory is essentially what's happening. It's
Yeah,
not
that's
getting to
all it is.
long-term memory. So,
I
yeah.
did I
The other
did
thing
want
I was gonna
Oh, go ahead.
go
I
ahead.
was gonna say I wanted to bring up again too is just the point of community too. I think that helped us so much, and I think like that's what we do
Yeah.
provide. And like the incubator is one of the biggest things is having consistent meetings, having a consistent group to talk to about this stuff, and people doing different things. So you actually are learning other stuff while you're still doing what you want to do. And I think that's crucial because that helped us so much because when you know you're going to be, say, meeting with a group of people every Saturday, okay, that's happening on Saturday, so it motivates you to get something done, even if you have a bad week. And or even just admitting you had a bad week and talking about it, and that helps too, because it helps you keep motivated and stay with it and stay accountable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge point that like can't be overstated is that when you look out there at the different types of education that are available in software development right now, 99% of it is exactly the same, right? It's all just learning syntax and frameworks. And the reality is, all of that stuff is free. Like, we offer coding education inside of our program, but we also encourage our students to use all of the free education that's out there because
Because it's out
we
there.
can't possibly teach you every single thing about everything out there. And no one program can do that, right? They all try to say they can, but they can't. It's impossible because look at how expansive software development is as a field, right? So what you want to do is learn from all these different resources. They're all free. Like every boot camp out there is charging you for free for something that's already free. But we do offer the one thing that all of these boot camps don't, which is the community, right? We keep you able to be accountable. We give you other people who are in the same boat as you, who are having the same struggles. And you have three mentors who can like actually talk directly to you, answer questions. I mean, I can't tell you how valuable it would have been while we were in our boot camp
Oh
to
my
have
God.
somebody where I could ask them a question and get like a realistic answer that wasn't didn't take 5 hours for somebody to look up or give me the wrong answer or send me in the wrong direction. Because we had some people in our group, like we had a quote unquote like coding mentor, I guess, in our group, sort of. Like it was just
Sort of.
somebody who was running the cohort, but 99% of the time, they didn't even know the answer to the questions because they were just being hired for like the cheapest possible thing in the world. So, um, they're getting
Yeah.
paid practically nothing to do that. So they didn't really know what they were doing. So I think that's one of the like biggest things that we can offer. And one of the things that's the most valuable is having a community of people who are also like-minded, like people who are committed to this idea. Because I think that's the other thing is like, regardless of what you do, what habits you try to build, if you're not committed to this idea first, and I think this is like a huge one that is really important for people to understand is you're never going to become a software developer if you're half committed to it. It just won't happen because it's a big undertaking. It's like I I can't even like relate it to something else. I mean, it's just any field that you want to get into, like if you want to become anything in your life, you can't become that by being half committed to it. You have to be
Yeah.
wholehearted, like this is what I'm doing with my life from now on. This is what I am becoming a software developer. And that's what we have inside the web dev incubator. So if you're looking for people like that, that's what we can offer is other people who are like, I'm committed. This is what I'm going to do from now on. Like I don't have interest in doing what I my previous jobs or anything else in my life. I want to become a software developer. And so you're going to have a lot more success if you fully commit to that from the beginning.
The commitment is a huge part of it too, because I think that's like
Yeah.
you see that so often though in so many things where people just they're half in, and so they never really
Yeah.
get far, and then they get angry why they're not great at it, and it's like, well, you haven't made this a priority. Like I mean,
Right.
even though like we said this before, but even though I mean our boot camp had a lot of flaws, like when we were doing that, I don't think I went out maybe once that entire like 11 months because I didn't have
Yeah.
time. I was working, I was doing that, and I really wanted it. So it's like, and I think that's the other thing. Like you have to ask yourself, like, do I want this bad enough to actually, and like to be fair, yeah, you could if this is something you want to do as a hobby and all, that's great. You can do it 30 minutes a day and you can take your time over years. But if it's something you want to transition into and you need to do that sooner, you need to commit a fair amount of time to get good at it. But then it does happen. I mean, that's the cool thing. If you commit, it does happen. And then it gets
Yeah.
easier and easier.
And you can see that like literally just from the comments below, if you guys are reading that, like these are people who are in the web dev incubator right now who are heavily committed, like Randall, Bryce. These guys are not just like, hey, we're taking this lightly. Like, I mean, these guys put in hours, right? Because they're committed to this idea. And I can tell you, they're the first ones who will get hired when it comes down to it, because the commitment shows on the back end, right? Like the amount of hours, how much time they put into problem solving, those things show to employers and they understand that. Like they know the difference between a developer who's taking it half seriously and somebody who's like put in the work, right? I wanted to mention one other thing that I think is super helpful in terms of building the habits. And this is like building projects of your own that you find
Yes.
interesting, right? There's a million tutorials out there that will show you ways to like build projects that are just like half interesting to you. The best thing that you can possibly do, I mean, when you're first starting out, obviously you need to learn the basics, but as soon as you can go from learning the basics to actually building projects that matter to you, you will be motivated to actually code because in the time that you're not coding, you're going to be thinking about the code that you want to write and wishing that you could sit down and code. So
Yeah.
you will actually have this motivating force to be like, man, I wish my app was like this much further, right? Because you want this thing to exist, you're going to put in the hours to
Oh,
do
and
it. So
there's nothing better too than when you're starting like a project like that. Because I remember like the early ones I worked on, like you're struggling with something and then you solve the problem and it feels so good when like you get it
yeah,
to work. But I think that's true. Like, dude, projects are like the number one thing. Because one, you need them. One, you
yeah,
definitely need unique projects and your own projects that you can talk about and explain to an employer or explain to a client so they can trust that you know what you're doing. But it's also learning how to go from nothing to building a full project is something that I think none of these boot camps and stuff teach people because all they're focused
not at
on is
all. Yeah,
they're focused on dipping your toe in all these different technologies, but never getting past like the basics, like the super basics. And you need to know how
yeah,
to build stuff. You need to know how to go from zero to production.
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, how many Hello World projects do we build?
Oh
And you
God.
literally look at any book on any language, and Hello World is the first chapter. So
Yeah.
literally,
Yeah.
they teach you the first chapter in every single language and leave you with
Oh,
nothing.
the best was when we did
Yeah.
the best was Django when they did that thing with that. It's like they didn't explain anything. They're like, just copy paste this to put in this and there you go. It's
Hmm.
like, well, why do we have all these files? What is all this? Like,
Yeah.
ah, God, it's a mess.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's why we designed the program how we have, where like literally we're in the over the past 3 weeks, we have taken our time, but we've gone from having a blank screen and nobody understanding Next.js at all to now the guys inside the web dev incubator have built a home page with a button that can pull a random cat picture from an API. Sounds like not that much, but when you look at the code and you look at the understanding that these guys have from literally 4 weeks ago, and this isn't like 4 weeks of software development. It's like 4 2-hour sessions where
Yeah.
they went from like, I don't even understand what Next.js is or how it works or any JavaScript framework to I just built an app that I can actually press a button that interacts with an API, updates the screen, does it using Next.js. Like that's mind blowing. And employers like, okay, that's what employers want to hire for is people who understand JavaScript framework. So yeah, so
And
I
it's
think
Yeah.
and
it's
it's
huge.
cool
Like,
because already they're using JavaScript frameworks. It wasn't waiting like, oh, I'm going to learn
yeah,
HTML now. Let me wrap my head around CSS. I'm going to dive into that for 3 months. Oh, but then JavaScript, that's hard. Maybe I'll do like 6 months or a year of that. It's like, no, start with Next.js because that's what people want. Let's start with Next.js. Guess what? 4 weeks later, you've got a Next.js
Well,
JS
I
app.
think that's the biggest problem is like, and I think I found this starting out too. I know you guys did too. Is like nobody gives you information on like the right path to take, and I think that's what we built too. Because like, there's no reason to spend you could spend forever learning JavaScript. JavaScript's a huge language. It does a ton of stuff, but the reality is
yeah,
like you need to put it in action, and putting it
yeah.
in action means using frameworks and stuff because nobody's going to ask you to use vanilla because it just takes too long, and it's
Yeah,
it's too much prone to errors and problems. That's why there's all this stuff out there in these tools, and you need to know them. Just like you need to know Git. Like you have to know GitHub if you're gonna, code. I mean, it's important. It's
yeah,
like those kind of things are essential, and that's what we focus on. I think that's the main thing.
yeah. I mean, you made me think of like this YouTuber that I've watched a couple of times who's a software developer, and he's built, I think he's built like 15 or 20 web apps, and he's made himself over $500,000 on these web apps, right? Totally designed by himself. And they're simple web apps that just do a few small things. But he talks about this all the time. He talks about how the end user, the person who, whether that's a company or that's like an actual end user, they don't care about the invisible, right? They don't care about the 50 different technologies that you know. They care that the app works, right? And that it's safe to use. And so he even says this. He's like, I don't, he uses React and Next.js to build his apps, and he's like, I don't know every single thing about Next.js, but I know the basics. And really, all you need to know is a few hooks like use state, use effect, and you can build pretty much anything you want. He
Yeah.
understands how to interact with a database. And he's like, I built apps that, you know, tens of thousands of people use. Like the same with myself. I built apps that
Yeah.
10,000 plus people use, and they're built simply with like a few things in React that are very repetitive. So you can spend all this time learning JavaScript for years and years and years, but the quicker that you jump, like you dip that foot in the pool and you jump into learning a JavaScript framework and understanding these more advanced technologies, which really, when you get down to it, are just as simple as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's just a different way of thinking about things.
Well, that's the other thing I think is that you find when you start learning software development is that think about it, everything on a computer is ones and zeros at the end of the day. It has to be broken down in the
Yeah,
most simple way possible. And I think that's why, this stuff looks so confusing at first, but once you start to work with it, you realize like, oh, it's like you're building with the tiniest possible blocks. So yes,
yeah.
sometimes if you want to do something, it takes a lot of code because you have to do a lot of things to make that thing work. There's a lot of little steps. But once you realize that, none of it's that scary because it's just like, okay, I just got to figure out the next baby step. That'll get me into the next part, then the next part, and you just build that up into an app. It's like
Yeah,
really cool.
exactly. Yeah, Chris made a good comment. He's like, I feel like even if I knew JavaScript inside and out, I still wouldn't be able to build a next app. And it's true because like knowing everything about JavaScript means nothing when it comes to knowing like NextJS because it's a whole different like ball game on its own. It's
Yeah.
like so you have to just learn NextJS too. It uses JavaScript. It's a JavaScript framework, but you learn it by actually doing it because the patterns that you see when you're building a Next.js app are exclusive to Next.js. Like you're not going to see these patterns repeated in vanilla JavaScript too much.
No, but you do repeat the same stuff over and over too. A lot of stuff is repetitive, and I
In
think that's
in yeah,
in
in
anything,
the
in any
framework.
kind of yeah, in any framework, even in just any development, because you're going to be doing a lot of the same
Yeah.
stuff over and over again. So I think like yeah, in terms of getting in the habit of it, just get in the habit of coding and get in the habit of doing these things, and you'll see over and over, you'll start to develop that muscle memory that helps you like kind of get faster and faster at this and be able to build things. Like now, I mean, like, dude, I can build things now in a couple hours that used to take me weeks or months,
Oh,
because
dude,
like,
totally.
yeah,
I
it's
mean, the amount
crazy.
that I got done on like half a plane ride with no Wi-Fi is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
literally, like
it's
I
crazy.
built like multiple modals, like a whole multiple page sections, like a lot in just a short amount of time. And it's because you just get used to these patterns and you can repeat them and then you can build stuff on the fly super easy without, I mean, what's cool is, and I never thought I would get to this point, but I've gotten to the point where I can code in my head almost. Like I don't even
Hmm.
need to see the screen update. I can like write code. And I know Chris has seen this before because I remember when Chris was like early on, we were doing some like CSS work with
Yeah,
him and he could only share like one screen at a time. So he was sharing like his code. And I was like, oh yeah, it's this thing. And now you have a red border. And he's like, how do you even know that? And I was like, I don't know. I just see it in my head
yeah,
now.
because
Like,
you've done it a million
but
times, and that's just
because
it.
yeah, it's a pattern that just repeats. Um,
But I think,
but yeah, I mean,
I was gonna
good.
say no. I think to that note, though, I think anybody getting into this, you just have to remember it's habits are important because it's just repetition, and you also have to be committed to lifelong learning, basically, because all these things are going to keep updating and changing. I mean, when we started using Next, what it was like, I don't know, maybe 5 iterations ago or something. Like it's on like I don't even know what its number it's on now, but it changes so much. They keep adding things. So you're
Yeah.
constantly going to be confronted with new problems and new things. And part of being a developer is just getting used to that. And getting used to that is just having that everyday experience of running into roadblocks, solving problems, and not being afraid to address them because you know you can
Yeah,
get through it.
yeah. So before we sign off, I want to answer Timothy's question. Thank you, Timothy, for asking a question. You guys, just so you know, you're always more than welcome to ask any question inside of the
Yeah.
group here on the calls. But Timothy asked, he's been out, due to like some dental work, and he has a question. He wants to know,
Yeah.
I have a GitHub account, but honestly don't know what am I supposed to do with it and where do I start? So yeah, and Chris is answering. Once you have a GitHub account, you probably want to connect it to VS Code. That way you can do projects in VS Code and push to GitHub. So yeah, I'll just give you sort of like a basic overview of like what GitHub is and what Git is. So there, just so you know, there's two different things. There's Git and there's GitHub, and they operate sort of the same, but they are different. So Git is a software that you install on your computer. If you own a Mac, it's pre-installed. If you have a Windows computer, you have to install it because that's how Windows does everything, apparently.
Yep.
Um,
Never easy.
but yeah, very
It's
easy.
not a
So
bug, it's a feature.
Hmm.
yeah, it's a feature. So, and then GitHub is a online website where you can,
Owned by
it's
Windows,
sort
by
of
the way, or
extend.
Microsoft.
Yeah, they're both on Microsoft. Yeah. So GitHub is a website where you can it's an extension of GitHub where you can save your code online. So think of Git and GitHub as a way of saving code over time. So you have this like linear path of how your code has evolved over time. It's sort of like saving your progress in a video game, except the benefit to this is it's version control. So let's say like you were playing a video game and you went down the wrong path and you died. Instead of dying, you could just go back to where that fork in the road was and take the other path. So in code, right, you can go back to a previous version of your code if you broke something, and then like continue coding in that direction.
Yeah, if you're unfamiliar with Git and GitHub, I would say like the best thing to do is just start by just committing your own projects locally and pushing them to a
Hmm.
repo that you've created on GitHub. Because that process will get you comfortable with just the basic functions of it and what you're going to use a lot of. And then you can kind of just explore other commands because it's all command line. So you can look up like the best 20 the most important 20 GitHub commands or something or Git commands
Yeah,
and you'll find
there's
tons of
there's a
lists.
really good one. If you just Google Git cheat sheet,
Yeah, that one's great.
there's a really good cheat. It's like usually the first thing that comes up. It's like a sort of like aqua teal colored page, and it has the most important commands that you're going to use. But just realize that there's one version that's on your own computer. So if you're using Git, that happens in the command line, and you can commit these changes, and then you can push them to GitHub. And you have to, like Chris said, you have to have a GitHub account that's already set up, and you have to basically connect it to your VS Code through the configuration, and you can look up how to do all that stuff in
Pretty
GitHub. It
easy.
sort of walks you through it when you set up your account. But that is something also that developers use when you get to the point where you're working on a team. That's how you share code between developers, and visualize and track code between developers. So it's something that if you want to actually find a career in software development, you 100% have to understand GitHub in and out.
And using it
Because
early is better, I think. Starting like because
yeah,
also it's also good to build because like everybody's gonna look at you're gonna put that account your GitHub on your resume. So it's good for people to see that you've made a lot of commits, you've done a lot of work, you've been using it throughout your learning process. And I think that's important because people can see your growth literally right there, on the screen.
yeah, yeah.
And
Randall said in
also,
there the
yeah,
Odin project is a good
that's what I was
place.
gonna say.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'll let this Randall say it.
Okay, so Randall was mentioning that the Odin project has a very good introduction to Git and GitHub. So I'm sure he'll comment down below to let you know how to find it. So that way you can
Yeah,
take
Yeah,
advantage of
yeah, he
that
put the
too.
link in there too as well. So it's in there.
yeah.
Okay.
But definitely get started because, like what Danny was saying too, I mean, that becomes more or less your portfolio, uh, right? It's what companies will look at when they want to see like projects that you've built before and like how much you've actually done as a developer. They're going to look at your GitHub account in most cases. So it's good to start committing your work to that and just build up, a good looking GitHub account.
It's also nice because all your code's then saved to the cloud. So if anything ever
Yeah,
happens, or if you're just like, I've had times where I need to use I was using, a different computer. I just wanted to work on something, and it's nice because you can
yeah,
just immediately access whatever you need, you know?
yeah. The other cool thing, and this is something that Randall has tried out before too, is they have a virtual IDE, like a VS Code in the browser that you can
Yeah.
use as well. So that's pretty cool too.
All
So
right.
cool. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode. If you are interested in joining the Web Dev Incubator, we do have a few spots left in beta, which will be closing in the next few weeks here. So if you're interested, now is the time to get in because it is significantly cheaper. And we also offer a free action call. So if you just have questions, you want to understand a little bit more about what is the Web Dev Incubator, you can sign up for one of those. Just put the word habit in the description and we'll reach out to you. If you just want to like jump right in, you can go over to codenoobs.io, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, and there's a button there where you can join the Web Dev Incubator and we'll get you all set up. It is a community of developers who are very committed to the idea of becoming a web developer. So that is what you are if you're committed to this idea of becoming a developer and that's something that you really, really want. we want you inside the program, and we're happy to help you along on your journey to become that developer. So unless you guys have anything else,
No.
we will see you guys if you are inside the web dev incubator. We'll see you in about 20 minutes. Chris says 10. He's jumping in early, I guess, today. But yeah, we'll see you in about 20 minutes. We'll put the link in the private Telegram group, which is one of the other things that you guys get. So if you want to join, you have access to us 24/7 through private Telegram for any questions, or if you want to talk to these other guys like Chris, Bryce, and Randall, who also are sharing the things that they've learned and places that they've found amazing resources. You
Which
get
is an
access to
insane
all these
benefit, by the
people.
way. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like 24/7. It's
like
awesome. And
anytime that you have any question about coding, you get an answer within minutes. I mean, I don't think I've seen any comment in that group not go unanswered for more than like 10 minutes.
yeah,
Even that I think is pretty long. So anyway, so
cool.
yeah, we'll see you guys inside. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. On Saturday, we will see you just as we have for the past 4 years. We'll be here every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. With another live stream for you guys. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Later.
Peace from Colombia.